Hi, my name is Nkauj Iab Yang, and today is Sunday, June 10th, 2018. So a little bit about my family history and myself. My parents, they are both Hmong, and they're from Laos. And they came here because of the war in Laos. Oftentimes people forget that, during the quote-unquote Vietnam War or American War, that there was a war in Laos at the same time. My dad served as a soldier for the CIA secret army, and he was only like a teenager during that time. I don't remember how old he was, maybe like 14 or 15. And so when the war ended in Laos in May 1975, my parents, they were already married, and they decided to flee with my grandparents to Thailand. And so from Thailand, they were there for a few months, and then they were resettled into the United States, specifically in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. They were sponsored by a church in San Francisco, and that's how they were resettled there. From there, my parents decided to move around and find family. So they moved to Texas, found family in Texas. From there, they also moved to Minnesota, where they were able to reunite with my grandparents. And then they eventually settled in Colorado for a few years, where most of my siblings and I were born. I have 5 brothers, and I'm the youngest. And then I was born in 1984. And in 1986, we decided to move to Sacramento, California, where I grew up. I grew up in North Sacramento, in Del Paso Heights. And, it was definitely trying times. We lived in low-income neighborhood with a bunch of other communities. I think at that time, we didn't know then, but after being able to go to college, I was able to learn and realize that in low-income communities, we all struggle, and we're all fighting each other for crumbs. So when I was in the K-12 system, it was a struggle, I definitely grew up knowing that something was wrong. I definitely grew up with a lot of discomfort. I grew up watching a lot of violence, both inside the house and outside of the house. A lot of times the violence inside the house was always around financial struggles. And, I just never knew how to put words to it. And it wasn't until I came to UC Berkeley, and I took my first Asian American Studies class. I think it was Asian Am 20A with Harvey Dong. If y'all don't know about Harvey, you have to get to know about him, where I did get to start, learning about Asian American history. And then I also was for the first time in my life in a school system, I was able to learn about Southeast Asian history. Even though it was just a bit of history, it was still that one significant moment in my life where I was able to finally feel whoa, somebody sees me, somebody sees that there's a struggle that I went through. And I think with that class, I was able to finally have the appropriate context, the appropriate words, the appropriate language, and understanding to understand why I grew up the way I did. And understand that, I have the power to be able to create change. And so I think, after taking Asian American Studies 20A, it changed my life. I came in as a, unintended poli-sci major. And, once I took Asian Am 20A, I decided I was going to be either Asian Am major or ethnic studies major. And I decided to be an ethnic studies major because I felt there were also ways for me to really be able to learn about other communities. And, to be honest, Asian American studies didn't always speak to me as a Hmong American. And so I think it was important for me to also be able to learn at the Asian American Studies program or curriculum. But it was important for me to also learn about other communities and see, how I'm able to connect and really build solidarity with other communities, whether it's culturally or in terms of the struggles that we face as people of color communities. So when I arrived to UC Berkeley, it was fall 2002. And I knew that immediately I needed to find a community. I was really thankful to be reached out by REACH, the Asian and Pacific Islander Recruitment and Retention Center, right away. And I mean, there were other organizations as well, but I definitely felt like I resonated with REACH the most, especially because, you know, there were other Southeast Asian students that were a part of REACH, and it was really about reaching out to neighboring Southeast Asian and low-income Asian American communities. And I knew that this is what I wanted to do, because I felt like when I was in high school, not a lot of people reached out to myself and my friends. And so I wanted to make sure that, you know, as many young people as I can reach out to, I wanted to do that so that they know that there's a life outside of their neighborhood, a life outside of their city. And also knowing that, you know, college is also it's an option for them. So I decided to become involved with REACH, and later on you know, every year I served as a coordinator for one of the programs. And then there was another organization called the Southeast Asian Student Coalition, SASC. I would say that SASC was probably the organization that helped to really increase and politicize me. Because when I got involved with SASC, I started to also learn at the same time about the deportation of Cambodians that was happening during that time. And so, you know, I learned about how Cambodians who came here as children, refugee children, they grew up in the streets the same way I did in the 90s, where, you know, we have to remember in the 90s, we had a lot of wars against low-income folks, right? So we had war on poverty, we had war against immigrant communities, and we also had, you know, like the 3 strikes law, just so many different policies that really criminalize low-income folks. And Southeast Asian communities was one of those communities that were criminalized by not only the state of California, but also the US. And so knowing all of that and learning about all of that, and then also learning how Cambodians were impacted by all of those different policies in the 90s, you know, I was then able to learn about how Southeast Asians were impacted. And, you know, they came here as lawful permanent residents, but would still get, you know, their rights taken away because they may have some sort of criminal offense. Criminal offense has a very wide definition. And so I felt like that was wrong. And I stood with SASC, and we, you know, demonstrated on campus. We were involved with other community organizations in Oakland, and then also nationally, which I didn't realize that I was going to be that involved. But because I care so much about my family and myself and my community, this was one of the fights that really kind of brought me into community organizing and community activism. And so I've just committed since then to really being able to learn about, you know, what are the various issues that impact not just Southeast Asian American communities, but Asian American communities, communities of color, you know, just low-income communities, immigrant communities, and really being able to fight for our rights. So I also wanted to share a little bit about just my overall experience at UC Berkeley. You know, I definitely think that being an ethnic studies major and also my on-campus involvement combined has really helped to kind of shape me for my professional career. But going back to my UC Berkeley experience, I definitely felt so honored to have met Harvey Dong, you know, just kind of take a risk and take Asian American Studies 20A, not really knowing what I was going to get myself into. And really, you know, also helped me to kind of complicate what it means to be Asian American. Growing up, I always identify as Asian American or Hmong. I never even knew to identify as Hmong American. So it was really interesting that I grew up saying that I was Asian American, but not even really knowing what was the origins of, even that political identity, and not even knowing what Asian American identity even means. So I was really thankful to have taken Asian American Studies 28 to learn about the origins of Asian American being a term that originated from Asian American organizers in the 60s, right? Before that, we were called Orientals, and I had no idea. And so to be able to have that understanding and learn that it's actually a political identity, and now it's just a very common identity, right? But also to really learn about the various struggles that various Asian American ethnic groups have gone through historically in the US, and to make that connection of like, what does all of this Asian American history mean to me as a Southeast Asian American, where my parents came here in 1975, where I was born in the 1980s. And I grew up as a Hmong person, being able to understand that, sometimes like there are differences between maybe Southeast Asians and other Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, but how we also are treated as like, a community or a group in the US, and that there's a lot of divisions, but that we need to fight harder to ensure that, we're united and understanding our differences, and that, having differences is not necessarily a bad thing. So that was really something that helped to kind of expand my understanding as an Asian American, and to really not just fight for myself or my community as a Hmong American, but to really, be able to understand like what are my struggles as a Hmong American, what are my struggles as a Southeast Asian American, but also what are my struggles as an Asian American and a person of color. And I got all of that understanding from, taking Asian Am classes and also ethnic studies classes. I also got all of that from being able to engage and learn about the TWLF struggles in the 60s and 70s, to learn about the connection of Asian Americans and being in solidarity with like the Black Power movement and the Black Panthers, and to see like the beauty that came out of it, the inspiration that various communities had on each other. It wasn't just about Asian American being inspired by other communities, but it was also about other communities being inspired by Asian American activists. And then to learn about the ethnic studies like 1999 strike, and how folks were really carrying on the struggle and the strike and the fight, really inspired me to kind of determine like, what is my role? If ethnic studies and Asian American studies has such a big impact on me, what is my role? And so that really helped me to kind of define like that I need to continue to be involved in the community, but that I also need to like really kind of sharpen my game and my education, right? So I needed to both do well academically, but at the same time, my heart is always in the community. And so that's why I think that's just who I am today, is that I need to also always know my shit. Like I always need to know, I always need to be knowledgeable about the situation. And at the same time, I always, first and foremost, need to be knowledgeable about the experience of the community, right? What are they feeling? What are they going through? What are the anxiety that's coming up for them, right? So that we could really kind of put the two together and really develop like what is the real solution that we need to really move forward. And so I think, coming to UC Berkeley was a beautiful thing for me. I know that we have a lot of criticism about, you know, these like systems, these institutions. And I have my own criticism, but at the same time, without UC Berkeley, I would have never met Harvey Dong. I would have never taken an Asian American Studies class. I would have never been an ethnic studies major. I would have never, you know, learned about REACH or SAS that really kind of pushed me to continue to be involved in the community. For me to really kind of, for all of that to shape me and my foundation, to be able to both be book smart and street smart, and also always have my heart in the community. And so that's kind of just how I can choose to live my life moving forward. My parents weren't that much different from other Asian American parents in terms of what they want and hope for their children's career, right? I know that they want the best for us. I know that they don't want to see us struggle the way that they struggle. So, you know, I'm really grateful that my parents pushed me hard. And when I say hard, it was really hard. But I have no resentment towards that, because I felt like without them pushing me that way, I would not be as resilient. But, you know, my parents definitely had that same goal. Like, they wanted me to be either a doctor or a lawyer or engineer, something that makes money, right? And originally, you know, I came in wanting to be a poli-sci major and considering being a lawyer. But as I mentioned, you know, I took my first Asian American Studies class, and that was the class that just made me feel like I know what my calling is, and that's to serve the people. And so my parents weren't happy about it. You know, I think they still were hopeful that I would come out of UC Berkeley as a different major. But it didn't happen. You know, I knew that, like, once my heart was set, that I was going to be ethnic studies major for the rest of my life, you know, pretty much. And so my parents, you know, were not happy. And I think it was more so they weren't happy because they just didn't want to see me struggle. They wanted to make sure that I had a career that would provide me with more than sufficient funding for me to live comfortably. And we know that sometimes serving the community doesn't always bring in the income. But, you know, my dad, he was definitely the first person in my life that taught me about getting involved with the community. So although he was also disappointed, I know that he understood my passion to serve the community, because he also was about serving the community and making sure that the community was in the know of what was happening if they didn't have like language access. You know, he was like one of the first Hmong person in Sacramento to do like a Hmong radio show, because he wanted to make sure that folks who didn't speak English understood what were the current news in Sacramento or even nationally, but also to just feel connected, you know, and not to be isolated. So I'm really thankful for my dad for teaching me those values. And I carry that to this day with me. Okay, and then moving forward. So after I graduated UC Berkeley, I was really appreciative to land a job with an organization, an education and justice organization in Oakland called Youth Together. And that was the first time I believed that, you know, people always say like, it's really about your networks. It's really about your networks. Because of my involvement, you know, on campus and both off campus, I was able to meet like really amazing community advocates and leaders on and off campus, right? And when I say off campus, I'm talking about like folks in Oakland, folks in Richmond. And, you know, we're like, as community, we're always kind of like observing each other and looking out for each other. And so I was really thankful that there was a job opening, and I would have never known about the job opening if I had not known this person, Jadon Kuhn, who was like, hey, Youth Together is looking to hire, you should definitely apply. And so I gave it a shot, and I landed a job with Youth Together, which is, as I mentioned, an education justice organization. And I felt like it was Youth Together that really kind of provided me that substantial training ground to be a community organizer. And so, my role was to raise the education justice at Berkeley High School. That in itself was its own challenge. We don't have to get into that, but I think that also really taught me or deepening my understanding and my experiences in building solidarity with other communities, because it wasn't just about serving the Asian American community. It was about serving low-income people of color, or students of color in this case, and ensuring that we were addressing the inequities in education that students of color faced at Berkeley High. So that's what I was able to do immediately after my years at UC Berkeley, and it really kind of set the tone in terms of, my ability to do community engagement, community organizing, working with young people, and really, providing them with the tools and the skills to really utilize their voice and validate that their experience and that discomfort that they were feeling, or they just knew something was unjust, but to be able to provide them with the appropriate language so that they can articulate the issues that they're going through, and also develop, possible solutions to those issues. That was something that I wanted to do, because I felt like as a young person, I felt that discomfort. I felt the unjust, but I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know the right words to speak, because I just did not know that this was what was happening. So I was at Youth Together, and during the same time, I think that being at Youth Together was great. And it also made me realize that there is still an underrepresentation of Southeast Asian young people being served, and their stories being heard. So oftentimes, Southeast Asians were a much smaller community, and so the smaller you are, the more marginalized you become. And so there was myself and a good handful of colleagues who were also doing community organizing work, included Jadon Kuhn, Samnang Chan, Mike Tran, and Tony Duengliseth. We all came together, and we all realized that we needed to do something about, serving Southeast Asian young people and providing them with the necessary space for them to be themselves, and be 100% themselves, and not feel like they had to sacrifice any piece of being a Southeast Asian young person to be a part of a space, so that they could feel and own that their voice mattered. And so we developed a space, and we were able to create a grassroots organization called Serve the People in Oakland. So during our early years, it was beautiful. We were able to get I want to say 50 to 60 young people to be a part of our grassroots organization, really politicize them, allow them the space to own their Southeast Asian experiences, whether it was the struggles that they were having in their families to the struggles that they have at school or in their neighborhoods, but for them to just feel like I could fully embrace who I am as a Cambodian American, or a Mien American, or a Vietnamese American, or even mixed ethnicity or mixed race, because oftentimes we don't have that kind of space. And so we were able to, we started in 2006, and it kept going. And when I moved to Sacramento, we also started Serve the People in Sacramento for a couple of years. But there's always a struggle with doing grassroots organizing, right? This is something that you do on top of your regular work. and it's volunteer and there's no funding. So I think because like we were having folks transition in and out of the organization, we eventually decided to fold the organization, or the Grassroots organization. But when it did exist, it was beautiful. You know, you had folks just really be able to feel empowered, and be able to not just be empowered, but to also take initiative and really fight for themselves and each other. Okay, so one of the things that, you know, I forgot to mention earlier is that it wasn't until Asian American Studies 20A where I felt like I was truly starting my healing process, because everything just started to make so much more sense. And so I think with that, like, it just fueled my drive to want to keep learning and growing and being a part of the community, so that I can serve the community, but also really heal from, you know, all the hurt that I experienced as a young person. And, you know, I think the more I started working with young people, the more I started realizing, like, it wasn't just the hurt that I experienced as a young person, but it's really about like healing the community, and also, you know, healing the generations that came before me, right? Because healing is not something that we talk about as Hmong Americans or as Southeast Asians on a regular basis. And so when we were a part of Serve the People, healing was such a big element in our curriculum. You know, we built a space for young people and even ourselves, because we were still, you know, trying to process and understand who we are as young community activists or organizers, and to really like tell our stories, you know, and to bond and to validate each other about the fact that, you know, our stories wasn't just something that we kept to ourselves, but that we were able to share it with each other and understand that it wasn't just something that I was experiencing, you know, like my brothers were experiencing it. Young people who came after me are experiencing it, and identifying that it was something that we needed to change, that it was not okay for young people or for Southeast Asian young folks to be growing up and feeling all of this pain and violence and hurt. And so, yeah, through Serve the People, you know, we really were able to provide a family for each other, and to really start our healing process. And I think for us, you know, sometimes healing could be super abstract, and it's like, what does healing even mean, right? But for me, and through Serve the People, you know, part of our healing is really being able to make sense of our narratives, you know, and building our narratives, and getting our narratives out there, and getting our stories told and being seen, you know, like that's part of our healing. And I think, you know, Serve the People was exactly that. You know, if we didn't do anything else, we were able to provide a healing space for young folks, for them to start seeing that, you know what, there's people out there that see you completely, and see that your story and your voice and your experience matter, and it's not something that's made up. And that's what Asian American Studies did for me, was that Asian American Studies saw me. My story was not made up, and you know, it made me feel powerful. After Youth Together, I became involved with Bante Sre, and the reason, so Bante Sre is a Southeast Asian nonprofit organization that serves young Southeast Asian women who are impacted by sexual exploitation. And I think sometimes people always ask me, why did you get involved with Bante Sre? And, you know, with me, knowing that Southeast Asian American community is already like a very marginalized community, the Southeast Asian women are even more marginalized. And, I think women-specific issues are not always addressed, right? And so a story that I don't tell too often is that when I was young, as a young Hmong American woman, Southeast Asian young woman, I felt like there wasn't a lot of love in my life. And so as a teenager, a young teenager, I sought it through a boyfriend, and I think, sometimes, like, even to this day, we have a lot of young Southeast Asians who may feel that way, that love is something that is missing in their life, which may or may not be true, right? For me, at that time, growing up as a teenager, I did not know that my parents were showing me love by providing a roof over my house or over me, and ensuring that I always have food to eat. I equated love with what I saw on TV. I grew up watching Full House, and I was like, yeah, like, my parents don't hug me. They don't tell me they love me. They don't, like, we don't sit and talk, and we don't have family dinners together. Like, that's what I thought love was, so I always felt like it was something that was missing. And, with all the discomfort and unjust that I was experiencing, but not having the words to articulate that, right? I felt like I was resilient. I went to go look for love, and knowing that there are predators out there, that, predators will take advantage of young women who are in a situation that I felt like I was in, right? So knowing that, I felt like, okay, I think that it's important for me to get involved with an organization like Bantay Srey, because I want to be able to provide a space where young people, young women, young Southeast Asian women felt loved, and that they didn't always have to resort to seeking it somewhere else, but that they were able to first and foremost find that self-love, that, if no one else loved you, like, how do you really love yourself, right? And really being able to, like, have that self-value. What does that look like? What does taking care of yourself look like? What does that even mean? And so I got involved with Bantay Srey because I care. Bantay Srey was not a community organizing space. It was not, a community activist space, but it was really about, but Bantay Srey was a self-development space. And, I think we could do all the community organizing that we want, but if we're not focused on the self-development, then we're not going to be able to start our healing, and we're not going to be able to truly love ourselves so that we can understand what loving others is. So I committed to Bantay Srey for 4 to 5 years. And it's a challenge, like, when you're working with young women who are impacted by sexual exploitation, there are going to be a lot of times where you feel really helpless, And I think for me, as much as I really love Bantay Srey, I also felt like I was more valuable if I found myself in a space where I was creating systems change again. And so I was able to find, maybe we found each other, the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center, CRAC, and it was the time where I was looking for a transition into a space where I could do systems change work, and CRAC was looking for their California director. So it was very timely, and I was able to, transition into their staff team, where, Southeast Asia Resource Action Center, CRAC, we are able to really push for policy change, both at the California statewide level and then also on the national level, to really address education, health, and immigration issues that our communities face, right? So it's, I know people have their criticisms around policy advocacy, but policy advocacy is a key element in creating systems change, along with self-development, along with direct services, along with community organizing. We need all of those different elements to happen at the same time. And yeah, sometimes the ideology will clash, but we need all of them to happen at the same time for our communities to really be able to see justice and equity simultaneously. So, you know, today I still serve as the CRAC's California Director of Policies and Programs. And one of our big wins recently is really being able to get the state of California to disaggregate health data, disaggregate Asian American Pacific Islander health data. And that's important to the Southeast Asian community because it goes back to visibility, as I was talking about. Like, it goes back to being seen. It goes back to like having accurate data so that we could really have the understanding of what's happening in the community so that we could really address the issue and ensure that our communities are living a quality of life. So after working a few years, you know, I had to decide, do I want to continue working, or, you know, is this a right time for me to pursue an additional degree? And when I was looking to apply for various master's programs, I was talking to all sorts of folks who have already received their master's. You know, I knew that I wanted to still do something that would enhance my community engagement and doing systems change work. So I talked to, you know, folks who received their masters in social work and public health and ethnic studies. And everyone was like, go, if you're gonna get your master's, go get something that is career oriented, right? And I so appreciate that recommendation because it made a lot of sense. But my heart was like, I just felt like I needed to do ethnic studies. I felt like I needed to do something like that because one of my goals is to really be able to contribute to Hmong literature about the Hmong community that was through a positive lens. You know, I think right now there's been really great work around, you know, Hmong in education, the struggles that we face, and really kind of recommending great solutions. But for me, I wanted to also do something else, right? And so although I received all these great suggestions and advice, I went ahead and pursued my master's in ethnic studies with the San Francisco State University. And the reason for that is because, you know, I felt that my heart was always about ethnic studies. Like I mentioned earlier, ethnic studies forever. And I felt that SF State would be able to provide me with the additional skills and lens to really contribute. You know, what does healing mean to the Hmong community? How does that look like, right? So I was really grateful to have the cohort that I was a part of and also have the professors that taught me. I'm still currently working on my thesis. It's been a few years, but it's something that's still on my mind to complete. And really thankful for also my advisor. Because I felt like, you know, I needed someone who understood like marginalized Asian American communities, but also, you know, really being able to push our stories out in a positive lens too, not just always looking at problems and providing the solution, but also being able to say, you know what, our communities have also been doing really great, or our communities also have great traditional ceremonies that serve us. You know, I know that our community's ceremonies are not perfect. I know that there are things that needs to be addressed, but I think that, you know, it's also about time we start writing about the beauty about our communities, you know, that are not often told. Because I think when we're looking at marginalized communities, we're always like wanting to react to the problem and figuring out the solution, right? But marginalized communities, we also have really beautiful things that are happening for ourselves, and that we don't always have to be addressing a problem, but that we could be celebrating what beauty that exists within. So through my education at SF State, my thesis topic is really looking at how traditional Hmong funerals have served as a healing mechanism for Hmong Americans, right? And how this really is able to teach Hmong Americans like deeper history, deeper traditions, and how that makes them closer to their loved ones that have passed, and also to their families and community that show up for them. And I think that's something that's beautiful and that needs to be told. And so just, again, I think, people always ask me, like, why do you choose ethnic studies and not Asian American studies? And, I think even pursuing my master's, it reaffirmed what I felt as an undergrad, that, Asian American studies is beautiful, but I think as a Hmong American, there are certain things about other communities that really resonates with me. So, for example, like taking my Africana Studies class and learning about Africana psychology and how similar it was, or how similar it is to how Hmong people live our lives. I can't even say Hmong psychology because that doesn't exist right now, right, in books. But it just resonated with me, similar to, Native American studies, and how, some of their psychology or way of living resonates with how Hmong Americans or Hmong community live our lives. But, I think, again, with pursuing my master's in ethnic studies, we were also really privileged to also take our Asian American courses with the Asian American master's cohort. And, I think it continues to remind me that although I am Hmong American and I identify heavily as Hmong American and Southeast Asian American, that I'm Asian American as well. And that, we have a lot of work to do so that we can continue to build our solidarity within the Asian American community, and really kind of, strengthen our unity so that we could really fight for the entire Asian American community, whether it's in California or on a national level. So when I was at SF State for my master's in ethnic studies, I was very careful about who I would choose for my advisor, and I chose Wesley Wenjin, who is an Asian American Studies professor. And the reason why I chose him was because he's Okinawan, and we know that Okinawans is also a very marginalized ethnic group worldwide. And so I knew that he was going to understand my struggles as a Hmong American. And he did. When I was so nervous when I approached him to be my advisor, and it just felt like community with him. He invited me into his office and he was like, yeah, let's just talk story. And I knew that he was the right person to be my advisor, because that's exactly how I feel as a Hmong American, is that, it's important for us to get to know each other before we jump into talking about business. In this case, would be my master's thesis. And so moving forward, for Asian American studies today, Asian American studies, ethnic studies continues to be extremely important. We need to also continue to remember the history of Asian American studies, and how it was really the students and the community that stood up and fought for Asian American studies to exist and ethnic studies to exist, right? It's really beautiful, because for me, as a ethnic studies major, and also for me as a student whose life changed because of Asian American Studies 20A, I think it's amazing to be a little bit further in my career and see more and more folks in the community as like government affairs manager, as professors who came out as Asian American studies major, who came out as ethnic studies major. And so that myth about like, oh, you're not going to be able to find a job because you're Asian Am or ethnic studies, that's what it is. It's a myth. There's so many people that have come out of these programs that are holding such powerful and meaningful jobs, that are creating just extreme changes for our community and really fighting for social justice. So I feel that, I'm just really blessed to be out in the field and meeting so many people who have really brought the value of social justice from Asian American studies into the field, into whatever area that they're working in, whether they're medical doctors or whatnot, and to really like create that change and really normalize the need for social justice and the fight for social justice. Even to this day, as a policy advocate, to see that, in California, on the statewide level, there's movements for the public K through 12 education system to really implement ethnic studies at that level of education and that age level is so inspiring, because we know that we don't want young people to wait until they go to college, if they go to college, to be able to learn about themselves and each other. And as for me, it was my starting point for my healing process, right? And it's so important that we start implementing K through 12 ethnic studies curriculum appropriately and ensure that we're fighting to make sure that California is putting money into this, so that young people can have, the lens to really learn about themselves and develop their self-love at a much earlier age in their life, but also to really have the lens to learn about each other, right? And the Sacramento City Unified School District, just this past year, there was an incident where there was a Chinese American student at McClatchy High School who did their science project on various ethnic communities and their IQs. And this student's project or conclusion was that East Asians have a higher IQ than Southeast Asians and African Americans. And it was a big blow up. One, it's like, of course, questioning why the teachers did not intervene in advance. But two, I think it also shows that our communities, even within the Asian American community, do not know enough about each other. And so that's why things like ethnic studies need to exist. Things like Asian American studies need to exist. And so what the school district did was really bring the school together to address the variation of history, the struggles that various communities face, and really to address the racism that exists because the lack of having opportunities to learn about each other and each other's history and struggles, and how we are really, more alike than we are different, and the differences are also something to celebrate. So, I think it's important that Asian American studies, although we have constantly faced, budget struggles, since the existence of the TWLF, and still not having the college that we want, but we've made a lot of progress, although we still continue to have struggles internally, and also, with the institution, or struggling with ensuring that there's enough folks that are majoring in the various programs so that we can continue the program. But at the same time, there is this movement where K through 12 folks are wanting to implement it too. So there has been a strong impact that has been made throughout the years. And, we can't forget the history of what the Third World Liberation fighters really stood for, because this is their legacy, right? That we're able to move it beyond the college institutions, but that it's also going to the K through 12, because it is so significant to our education, not just academically, but as our education as human beings, and as communities. And as communities who live with each other, amongst each other, right? And so I think it's important that, moving forward, we remember to hold on to the elements of what makes Asian American studies and ethnic studies what it is, which is really continuing to ensure that our communities have access to our own history, and that our communities are the ones that are writing our own history, and that, we have that element of fighting for social justice for our communities, and that we continue to be involved in the community, and that we don't become, too caught up in what the university or the institutions are expecting of us, but that we're able to balance, how do we play the game with the institution, but how do we also continue to have the core value of community and social justice? Okay, I'm very optimistic about the future of Asian American studies. I believe that, there are so many products of Asian American studies that are out there doing the work, fighting for the community. And, I think that I will remain optimistic as long as Asian American studies continues to remember that what needs to be at the core of Asian American studies programs or departments is the students and the community. And that we continue to expand our listening skills, to deeply listen to what the students in their community is saying. And I think that is what's going to continue to drive Asian American studies programs and departments forward.